Have you ever been so low that even breathing hurt? Have you ever felt like God was silent while your soul cried out for help? This story is for you who carry a pain in your chest that no one sees, for you who have thought about giving up, for you who are smiling on the outside but falling apart on the inside, because that's exactly how his transformation began. He was broken, suffocated by depression, believing the end was the only way out, until something inexplicable happened. In the darkest moment of his life, when loneliness seemed to scream louder than any hope, a voice echoed in the silence. And it wasn't just any voice. It was a voice that invaded the heart, that broke the invisible chains of the soul. It was the voice of God. But before that happened, he no longer saw any meaning in anything. Waking up was a burden, living was a struggle, and praying was no longer part of the routine. He thought God had forgotten about him. Maybe you're feeling this way right now. Maybe you think you've prayed too much, cried too much, and not been heard. But what if I told you that it was precisely in this silence that God began to act? This is not just another story. It's a real testimony, a cry of hope in the midst of chaos. Because when everything seemed lost, when the pain became unbearable, God responded in a supernatural way. And that's what you'll see now. Don't jump, don't leave. Every second of this story could be the one that reminds you that there is still a purpose for your life, that even in the darkest valley, God's presence never leaves you. He was just waiting for you to surrender. You know that feeling that no one understands what you're going through. He felt it too. He felt like the world moved on while he was stuck in time, carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. His pain had no name, but it had a form. It was emptiness. It was the crying hidden in the pillow. It was the desire to disappear. But when he thought it was the end, God said, "This is where I begin." And it's from that moment on that everything changes. Because what comes now is not an invention. It is not a script. It's a miracle. It's transformation. It's an answer to prayer. And if you've come this far, maybe it's because God also wants to talk to you. So take a deep breath, open your heart, and keep watching, because the voice he heard can echo inside you too. But before continuing, I need to tell you something very serious. What you will see below is not just about a testimony, it's a warning. We are living in difficult times, times where pain, loneliness, and despair have silenced lives every day. And more than ever, it is urgent that stories like this reach those who need them. Because there are people right now thinking about giving up, believing that there is no more hope. And if this video reaches one of them, it could be the thread of life that holds her back. So, if this message has already touched your heart in some way, don't keep it unto yourself. Click the like button, subscribe to the channel. It's not just a simple gesture, it's an act of faith. It's the fastest way to make this content reach those on the edge. Every like, every new subscription helps this truth break the silence that so many people are experiencing right now. And it's not an exaggeration. The Bible already warned us, in the last days, love would grow cold, fear would increase, and many would faint because they saw no way out. But it also taught us that God's light shines brightest in the darkness. And that's why you're here, because there is a purpose, there is a message, and it's not over yet. The next part of this story will show you exactly how God enters the scene when everything seems hopeless. So stay with me, don't leave now. What comes next could change everything. He was that type of person that everyone liked to have around. Smiling, helpful, the one who always had a joke ready to lighten the mood. In the eyes of others, his life seemed to be on track. I had a good job, a family present, loyal friends. On Sundays, he was seen in church, singing with his eyes closed and hands raised, like someone who lives in full communion with God. But what no one knew was that behind that wide smile, there was a tired soul, tired of trying to be strong, tired of pretending everything was fine when in reality, inside, he felt increasingly broken. On the outside, He was the picture of stability. Inside, the echo of emptiness only. Increased. The prayers no longer had tears because he had already cried everything he could. The shine in his eyes was replaced by a constant tiredness, difficult to explain. And even surrounded by people, he felt alone. So alone that, many times, he preferred the silence of his room to the company of the people he loved most. The worst thing is that not even he knew exactly what was happening. It was as if something had disconnected inside him. The faith that once moved mountains could now barely sustain positive thinking, and little by little, the darkness became a more familiar place than the light. This is a more common reality than it seems, and perhaps you are identifying with it now. Sometimes those who suffer most are those who show it least. They are the ones who help everyone, but cry in the shower so no one can hear. They are the ones who say everything is fine, but inside, they just want to disappear. And it was in this scenario that everything began to change. But before the change, the collapse came. The routine, once organized, became a burden. Work stopped making sense. He began to move away from people, responsibilities, and most importantly, the presence of God. What was once a foundation, faith, now seemed like a weight he could no longer carry. He could no longer pray like he used to. I read the Bible and felt nothing. He attended church, but left it more empty than he entered it. It was as if I was living on automatic, breathing out of obligation, waiting for some miracle to happen, even though I didn't believe it was still possible. And this is the most delicate part of the fall, because it doesn't happen all at once. She comes softly. It comes disguised as, "I'm just tired." It's hidden in phrases like, "It's nothing, just a phase." And when we realize it, we are already sunk. That's exactly how he felt. One step at a time towards a hole I thought I would never get out of. And the worst, I believed that God had remained silent, that he didn't care anymore, that he had given up on him. And if you've ever thought this, know that he thought it too. He thought many times. But here comes something that needs to be said urgently. God never abandons his own. Even when we distance ourselves, even when we can no longer talk to him, even when pain screams louder than faith, God remains. Silent, perhaps, but present, waiting for the right moment to act. And often, this moment comes when we are about to give up on everything. That's where he manifests himself in a supernatural, unexpected, transformative way. That's why this video is so important, because there are thousands of people living exactly this reality right now. People smiling on the outside and dying on the inside. People who, like him, think they have lost their connection with God, who believe that there is no solution, that the hole is too deep, that God's silence is a sign of abandonment. But his story proves exactly the opposite. And if you're here watching until now, maybe it's because this story is for you too. That's why I need you to help me spread this message. Like this video right now, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, but you do it with intention, you know? Do it with faith, because each like makes this content reach more people. And you could be the reason someone hears a voice that saves their life. It seems simple, but it's not. It is serious. We are dealing with lives, with souls in pain. And maybe, just maybe, this video will be the bridge that connects despair to a new beginning. And take the opportunity to comment below. Have you ever felt this type of silence? Have you ever had a moment when it seemed like God wasn't listening anymore? Share your experience, not just to vent, but to strengthen other lives as well. Your comment could be an answer for someone. It could be the push someone needs to keep fighting. Sometimes God uses the wounds we have to heal others. And it's not leaving yet, because what comes next is the breaking point. That's when everything falls apart. It's rock bottom. But it is also where God begins to rebuild the impossible. You need to see with your own eyes what he did when everything seemed over. Because this is the moment when the miracle begins to take shape. And I promise you, you won't want to miss what's coming. Little by little, everything lost its color. It wasn't all at once. There was no cry for help, no clear warning. It was silent, disguised as tiredness, wrapped in everyday excuses like "I just don't have time" or "I need to rest." But inside, something was fading. The sparkle in his eyes was the first to disappear. Then came silence. A silence that took over the days and nights. A silence that screamed inside, while on the outside, everything seemed normal. He didn't want to leave anymore. Invitations from friends began to be declined. Messages on the cell phone went unanswered. The working days dragged on. The nights became unbearable. Every sunset was a reminder of another day, one on autopilot, and every dawn, a weight. A new cycle of pretending, of forcing a smile, of trying to appear whole when inside I was in pieces. And what hurt most was that no one understood, because he was the strong one, the one others trusted, the one who always had advice on the tip of his tongue, a word of faith, "it will pass," ready to offer someone. But who takes care of everyone? Behind the strength, there was a collapsing heart, and no one saw it, nobody knew, nobody really asked, because he wouldn't let me either. He learned from an early age that a man of faith can handle it, that a servant of God cannot show weakness. But the truth is that even the most spiritual people face deserts, and sometimes the worst desert isn't the one that leaves you alone. It's the one that makes you feel like not even God is there anymore. The prayers, once full of passion and dedication, turned into empty monologues, words thrown into the wind with no expectation of a response. And over time, not even that remained. He stopped praying, he stopped looking, he stopped believing. The Bible was closed, the praise was silenced. Faith became just a memory of what he once experienced, and when faith disappears, the world loses its meaning. The plans, the dreams, everything seems so distant, so unattainable, so purposeless. The bed became a refuge or prison. It depends on the point of view. He spent hours there, motionless, staring at the ceiling as if waiting for an answer that never came. Sometimes I heard praise playing from afar, perhaps from a neighbor, and inside I felt a mix of longing and guilt. I missed the time when I was moved, when I heard about God. Guilt for not feeling anything anymore. It was as if he was spiritually disconnected, as if God were 1,000 kilometers away. But ironically, it was in this silence that he was closer than ever. How many times did he cry in secret? Hard to count. The tears became routine. I cried in the shower so no one could hear. I cried into my pillow so as not to attract attention. And often, I cried for no apparent reason. Silence was enough, solitude was enough, and everything came back to the surface. Memories, frustrations, unanswered prayers. Every memory was an open wound. Every silence from God, another pain in the chest. And maybe, right now, someone on the other side of the screen is feeling exactly that. Maybe you are experiencing this same silent fall. Maybe you too are keeping quiet, hiding, moving away little by little. If this is your case, comment below. Talk to me. I know it's not easy to expose yourself, but sometimes when we write what we feel, the pain starts to come out through the words. And more than that, you could be the answer in someone's life, because there are people reading the comments looking for a spark of hope. And what you share could be exactly what that person needs to not give up. Coming back to him, there was a moment when the weight became unbearable. The desire was to disappear, literally disappear, not out of malice, but because it seemed like the pain was no longer curable. He thought, God, if you are still there, why don't you hear me? Why don't you answer me? Why do you leave me here in this void? But there was no answer. There was no signal. And little by little, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, God had given up on him. That his mistakes, his failures, his unbelief had been too much. That he had crossed the line. That he was no longer worthy of hearing God's voice. This is where the biggest deception that the enemy plants in our thoughts lives. He wants us to believe that God moves away when we are weak, that he remains silent when we make mistakes. But the truth is different. The truth is that God was never so close as at that moment when he thought he was alone. And this revelation would come in a way he would never have imagined. But it wasn't time yet, because the bottom of the well still had one more stretch to go. And it was in this stretch, in this dark and silent valley, that God began to prepare the ground for the miracle. But before the miracle comes the breaking point. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about now, about the moment when the pain reaches its limit, when everything inside him screams for help, when the thought of giving up becomes more real than anything else. This is where many stop, where many give up. But that was when God did what only he knows how to do: transform death into life, despair into hope, silence into voice. A voice that would come clear, powerful, unexpected. A voice that would break the cycle of pain. A voice that you will hear along with him next. The day came when he simply didn't want to continue. There was no more energy to wake up, to smile, to pretend. Everything inside him was tired, but it wasn't a common tiredness, the kind that sleep resolves. It was an exhaustion of the soul, an exhaustion that went beyond the body. Life seemed meaningless, and each new dawn was like a weight on his shoulders. He didn't want to fight anymore. I didn't want to resist anymore. There were no more reasons to convince him to keep trying. It was as if everything had collapsed, as if there was nothing left to rebuild. That day, he woke up feeling like he had no purpose. The thoughts came like arrows, fast, cruel, whispering lies that seemed like truths. You are not missed. No one will feel your absence. Not even God cares anymore. These thoughts, which previously came every now and then, were now constant. And more than that, they seemed to make sense. He looked in the mirror and didn't recognize himself. A dull countenance, dull eyes, exhausted soul. There were no longer tears. There was no longer strength. There was no longer faith. It was then that he made a decision. It wasn't impulsive. On the contrary, it was thought out, analyzed, planned, in silence, of course, because nobody knew, nobody suspected, and that is the danger of silent despair. He hides himself so well that he fools even those closest to him. On the outside, it was just another ordinary day, but inside, that would be, in his mind, his last. The end of a journey marked by frustrations, hidden pain, and prayers that he believed had been ignored. He sat on the edge of the bed, his gaze lost, fixed nowhere, hands shaking, heart racing. And the mind is confused but decided. It was the end, he thought. Nothing made sense anymore. And it was at that moment, in the darkest moment of his entire life, that something completely unexpected happened. Because before taking any action, he did something that not even he knew how to explain. As if it were an instinct, or perhaps a remnant of the faith that once sustained him, he prayed. It was not a beautiful prayer, nor full of eloquent words. It was a faint whisper, almost a sigh. God, if you're still, give me a sign, just one, because I can't take it anymore. It was a prayer made without hope. He himself didn't believe he would be heard. But for some reason, she left. From the bottom of your chest, like a last cry for help. And this is where something starts to change, something that cannot be explained with human logic, because immediately after that prayer, the atmosphere changed. The silence in the room became heavy, different. The air seemed thicker, as if something invisible had entered it. He felt a shiver run through his entire body, and for the first time in a long time, he felt seen. But it was not yet the moment of the miracle. It was not yet time for a clear answer. It was the beginning of a turning point, but he didn't know it yet. What he knew was that something inside him had shaken. A small flame lit up in the middle of the darkness. Weak, shy, but real. And even without understanding, he remained there, sitting, motionless, waiting for something, any sign that he wasn't talking to himself, any gesture from heaven that said, I am here. This scene, this moment, this point of despair, It carries something that many people live in silence. Maybe you're there on the other side of the screen, feeling exactly that. Maybe no one knows about your pain. Maybe you're also tired, thinking it's no longer worth it. But if you've made it to this point in the video, I need to tell you something. There is still hope. There is still a voice that can break this silence. There is still a God who sees even when no one else does. And sometimes a simple prayer, even without faith, even without strength, is enough to open a breach in heaven. Tell me in the comments, have you ever said a prayer without believing it? Have you ever felt like you were talking to the walls, as if God were too far away? Talk to me, because this conversation could be what keeps someone going today. And it may be that right now, God is using exactly that. This video, this story, this question, to show you that He is still listening, that He is still with you, that the final point you thought about putting is not the end of the story. And if you're here, it's because there is more, because something inside you still waits for a fresh start, still wants to hear that voice that transforms. And that's what we're going to talk about now. Because what comes next is the most unexpected moment of this entire journey. It's the answer he didn't expect. It is the voice that breaks the silence, that pierces the pain, that breaks the enemy's lies and rekindles dormant faith. It is the moment when God speaks, and when He speaks, everything changes. Get ready. You are about to witness the impossible. But in the silence of the room, he heard it. It was a thick, charged, almost solid silence, as if time had stopped. Everything was static. The air, the light, the sound. And then, in the middle of that nothingness, something came a voice. It wasn't high. It wasn't dramatic. It was serene, deep, full of an authority that did not require volume. A voice that was not heard with the ears, but with the soul. She didn't cross space. She went through the spirit. And he said, with a clarity impossible to describe, "I'm here. You're not alone." It was just those words, so simple, so direct, so full of presence. But in that instant, everything changed. It was as if a ray of light had pierced the densest darkness, as if the walls of the room had disappeared, and he was enveloped by something bigger than himself, bigger than the pain, bigger than any logical explanation. The peace that invaded the environment was unusual. It wasn't the peace you feel when a problem is resolved. It was a peace that did not depend on circumstances, a peace that came straight from the heart of God. And he cried. He cried like never before. It wasn't the cry of despair, it was the cry of reunion. He was certain that God had never abandoned him, that even when he stopped, searching, God was still there, waiting, silent, yes, but present. He cried and sobbed like a child who finally finds his father's arms after being lost, because that was exactly it. He had lost his way, but now he was in the arms of the Father, a Father who does not condemn, who does not demand, who only loves, that just welcomes. That voice, so gentle and powerful at the same time, swept away all thoughts of death from within him, washed the mind, cleansed the heart, and for a few minutes, he just cried, without saying a word, without saying an elaborate prayer, because I didn't need to. The connection was re-established. The presence was there. The Holy Spirit was real. It was palpable. It was as if God had placed his hand on his chest and said, "I never left here." Have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever had a moment when everything suddenly made sense? When, in the midst of the deepest pain, you felt a presence that you can't explain, but that changes everything? If you've experienced this, comment below, tell me how it was, because there are people watching now who need to know that this doesn't just happen in videos. This is real. This can happen to anyone, even with you. And perhaps it's about to happen now. The most impressive thing is that at that time he saw nothing. There were no angels appearing. There were no visions or supernatural phenomena visible. It was just him in the room. But it was as if the sky itself had tilted towards. It was as if God had stopped everything, just to answer that last prayer. the one he didn't even believe in anymore, the one that came out more like a groan than a sentence. But God heard, because God always listens, and more than listening, he responds. It is at this point that everything begins to rebuild itself. The ground feels firm again. The air has meaning again. The colors, which had faded, reappear. Not all at once, not like magic, but in small doses, in detail, in small gestures, in smiles that return, in hugs that warm, in days that no longer seem so long. And it all starts with one thing, the voice that says, "You are not alone." Because this phrase, spoken by God, has the power to resurrect everything that seemed dead. And he who minutes before was ready to give up, now found himself overcome by new strength. I didn't understand how or why, but something inside him had changed. The pain was still there, but now it no longer defined him. Sadness was still around, but it no longer owned his heart. The fear was still there, but now there was greater courage, because he had heard, he knew God was with him, and that was enough. From then on, the days began to take on new shapes. Small actions took on a new meaning. Getting out of bed was no longer a punishment, it was an achievement. Going out to work was no longer a burden, it was a mission. Each step, no matter how small, was a silent testimony that God had spoken, and no one could take that away from him. No doubt, no argument, no circumstance could erase that encounter. He had been touched, it had been renovated, he had somehow been resurrected. And if you're listening to all this and wondering, would God speak to me like that too? I need to tell you with certainty, yes, God speaks, and he speaks in many ways. Sometimes with words audible to the heart, other times with a verse, with a song, with a hug, with this video. God is always trying to reach us, but we need to silence the noise around us. Sometimes we need to surrender, and that's what he did. He surrendered, and when we surrender, God reveals himself. Now imagine what happens after that moment. Imagine how his life begins to be shaped again. From the inside out, you will see, you will feel it, because this story isn't over yet. What follows is that voice's practical response. It is a reflection of God's actions in everyday life. And when you see what happened to him after that encounter, perhaps you will never doubt that God still works miracles today. And maybe, just maybe, this video is the beginning of your miracle too. From that moment on, something started to change. But not in a magical way, as many imagine. It wasn't like turning on a light and seeing all the shadows go away. It was more like the first breeze after a long storm. Subtle, gentle, almost imperceptible at first, but real, totally real. And that breeze was enough to make him take the first step, the hardest, the most decisive. He decided to seek help. It was at that moment that he understood that faith and action go together, that trusting in God also means opening up, asking for help, accepting support. Because sometimes the miracle does not come with a flash from the sky, but through a conversation, a friendly shoulder, a professional prepared by God to extend a hand at the right time. He started talking to people he trusted. He spoke with a friend of faith, shared with a church counselor, and even sought professional help. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't ashamed to say, "I'm not okay." That sentence, said out loud, was liberating. It was as if he had finally lifted a huge weight off his shoulders, not because the problems went away, but because he was no longer trying to face them alone. At the same time, prayer returned, but in a new way. No more those memorized, hurried, soulless prayers. Now every word was felt, every sigh turned into a conversation with God. He started talking to God like a hurt son, returning to his father's house. Without masks, without filters, he spoke of fear, pain, shame, but also gratitude for being standing. He cried. Sometimes he couldn't finish a sentence, but he knew God was listening, and that was enough. Little by little, the Bible, which used to be forgotten on the shelf, covered in dust and guilt, became a daily companion. He didn't read out of obligation. I read it out of necessity. Each verse seemed to be written, especially for him. It was as if God was answering page by page all the questions he carried in his chest. And when he read, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest," he didn't just understand, he felt it. It was up to him. It was for him. And that rekindled a flame that despair had almost extinguished. Little by little, he started leaving the house again, short but meaningful walks. The air felt different. The daylight, which had previously bothered him, was now a reminder that life still went on. The details caught his attention again, the sound of the birds, the wind on his face, the texture of the grass under his feet. Simple things, but for those who have been at rock bottom, they are true daily miracles. Because healing most of the time is not an event, it's a process, a constant fresh start, and he understood that it was okay to need to start over. Because God specializes in new beginnings. Every day, even with ups and downs, he insisted. Sometimes he relapsed. Moments when sadness seemed to want to return. But now, he had tools. He knew where to draw strength. I knew who to talk to. And most importantly, I knew who to trust. He was no longer the same person. He was someone rebuilt step by the grace of God. He started writing about what he was experiencing. He wrote down the verses that touched his heart the most. He recorded the small victories of the day, the signs that God was acting even in the details. And it helped him remember on difficult days that he had already won much bigger battles. He returned to church with a different heart. No longer for appearance but for thirst, out of hunger for God. Each service was like a breath of life, each praise, a sung prayer. He raised his hands, not in ritual, but in true surrender. I knew that without God, I wouldn't be able to take another step. And it was precisely this dependence that strengthened him. Because when we are weak, that is when God's strength is perfected in us. And something incredible started to happen. Other people started to notice. The sparkle in his eyes returned. The smile, once forced, was now spontaneous. Not because everything was resolved, but because he had been transformed from the inside out. And this transformation overflowed. Friends began asking what had changed. People who never knew about their pain now saw healing stamped in their attitudes. And when they asked, he didn't hesitate. It was God. He lifted me up. When I thought it was the end, he spoke to me. And since that day, I am different. Have you ever experienced a process like this? Or are you living? Maybe you're right at that stage, starting to get up, trying to pray again, opening the Bible after months, maybe even years. If this is your case, comment below. Tell me how this process is going for you. Because every comment can turn into a chain of support and faith. And it may be that by writing, you will also heal a little more. Sometimes God deals with us as we serve, as we share, as we reach out. The most beautiful thing about all this is that he hasn't forgotten where he came from. And that's why he doesn't keep what he experienced to himself. He knows that his story can fuel someone's faith. And so at every opportunity, he shares. Talk about the moment of pain without shame. Talk about rock bottom without fear, because he knows that the power of testimony lies precisely in this, showing that even when everything seems lost, God still has plans. God still writes new chapters. God still performs miracles. And when they ask how he managed to get out of that darkness, he answers with a smile and eyes full of truth. I didn't get out alone. It was God who got me out of there. And he continues with me every day. And it is exactly on this journey, this step-by-step healing process, that the next part of the story takes place. Because when someone is healed from the inside, it starts to be reflected in everything, in relationships, in purposes, in decisions. And that's what we're going to see now. How God, after restoring the heart, also began to rebuild the life around it. You can't miss what comes next. The miracle is just beginning. From that moment on, something started to change. It was barely noticeable to the eyes of others, but within him, a silent revolution was underway. And no, it wasn't fast. It wasn't easy. It was not miraculous in the way many imagine, with finger snaps or visible and spectacular interventions, but it was real, intensely real, a reconstruction process that involved every part of who he was, his mind, his emotions, his faith, his relationships, and especially the way he saw himself before God. In the first few days after that supernatural encounter, he still felt fragile, almost like a child learning to walk again. It was as if I was stepping on sacred territory but afraid of slipping. There were still grey days, moments when pain whispered old lies. But now there was also something he hadn't had in a long time. Hope, a timid but lively hope, a small but burning flame. And it was that spark that pushed him to the next step, the most difficult perhaps: seek help. With humility, he recognized that he would not be able to get out of that storm alone. Then he opened up. He looked for someone trustworthy, someone with spiritual maturity, someone who would listen to him without judgment. He also sought professional help because he understood that God can act through psychologists, counselors, doctors. After all, he is the God of all healing, and healing today. He talks about depression as part of his journey, but never as his final destination. That deep pain, which one day almost consumed him completely, is now remembered with reverence as a valley that led him to find something infinitely greater than himself, the true meaning of life. The anguish that once defined his days has now turned into testimony, and it's not just any testimony. It is a testimony of transformation, of rebirth, of a new beginning guided by God. He doesn't talk about pain with shame. On the contrary, he speaks with authority, with conviction, because he knows that it was there in the darkness that the brightest light shone. The faith that previously seemed lost has resurfaced, now more mature, more solid, more alive. He didn't just come back to life. He came back with purpose, and not just a personal purpose, but a calling, a call to serve, to share, to extend a hand to those who are still at rock bottom. He understood that his healing was not just for him, it was for many. It was for everyone who, like him, had ever thought about giving up, had faced God's silence, had cried in secret, had doubted whether there was still hope. And that's why he speaks, and speak with courage, with an open chest and a full heart. He does not hide the past because he knows that it is precisely through it that God reveals his glory. He remembers the days when opening his eyes was an effort, when the weight of existence was unbearable. But now each new dawn is a chance to be grateful. Each day is an opportunity to announce, I have been restored, and it is God who has restored me. They weren't just pretty words, nor ready-made motivational phrases. It was presence. It was a meeting. It was divine intervention. Today, he is part of support groups. He helps people who are going through the same pain he faced. Listen, advise, pray together. Sometimes it says nothing, it's just present. Because he learned that often what heals is not speech, but presence, the company, the shared silence. And in this mission of welcoming, he finds himself, because he understands that everything he experienced was not in vain. Every tear shed, every sleepless night, every thought of giving up, all of this now has meaning. All of this has been redeemed. He also began to be called to give testimony in churches, meetings, and events. At first, he was reluctant. He still looked small, fragile. But God reminded him, it is in your weakness that I am made perfect. And he obeyed. And it was. And it has been. And every time he shares his story, he sees people standing up, wiping away their tears, believing again. Because when someone hears a true testimony, full of the presence of God, full of real faith, full of pain transformed into healing, something lights up inside the heart, something awakens, a flame of hope, maybe right. Now you are watching this video and you feel something different happening inside you. Maybe your tears are falling. Maybe your heart is beating faster. Maybe you're thinking, I need this. I want this. And I tell you, with all the authority of heaven, it is possible. The same light that reached him in that dark room can reach you where you are. The same voice that said, I am here, you are not alone, is saying this to you now. And do you know why? Because God is the same. Yesterday, today, and forever. He doesn't change. And his love doesn't change either. You don't have to wait to be perfect to get closer. You don't have to be well to start looking. Start as he began. Broken, hurt, tired. God loves to restore what the world considers beyond repair. God loves to give new beginnings, and maybe, just maybe, this video will be your starting point. Perhaps it is now that your story begins to change. Perhaps this pain you feel today will be your greatest testimony in the future. Comment below, what was the moment when God reached you? Or if you're still waiting for that moment, say that too. Say, I am waiting for him. Let's pray for you. Let's declare together that the miracle will come. The most beautiful thing is that he was never the same again. Pain shaped him, faith sustained him, and purpose drove him forward. Now he walks lightly. Life isn't perfect, the problems haven't gone away, but he knows who's in control, and that's enough. He learned that trusting God does not mean the absence of pain, but the certainty of company. He learned that faith is not about feeling all the time. It's about remaining even when you don't feel anything. And it was in this permanence, in this continuous surrender, that his life was rebuilt brick by brick, until it became what it is today, a house built on the rock. He smiles genuinely, look into the eyes with peace, live with purpose, and most importantly, he carries a voice within him, the same voice he heard in that room, the same voice that transformed everything. And it is this voice that he carries forward, that echoes in every testimony, in every word, in every gesture. Because when we are reached by grace, it is impossible to remain silent. It's impossible not to share. It is impossible to keep to yourself what once saved us. And it is in this new time, in this new journey, that he discovers day after day that there is still much more. That God's actions did not stop there, that the miracle continues to happen in the details, in the meetings, in the opportunities. And that's what we're going to talk about now, because the fresh start was just the beginning. God still has much more to do, and you will see with your own eyes how this story continues to be written with divine hands, with an eternal purpose, with a clear mission to bring light where there was only darkness. So get ready, because what comes now will impact you even more. If you are at rock bottom right now, at this very moment, with a heavy heart, without strength, with confused thoughts and tears that you can't even explain where they come from, I need you to stop for a second and listen. Listen with your soul, because what I'm going to tell you is not just to comfort you. It's to remind you of an eternal truth. God's voice still echoes in the darkest places, even where no one else goes, even where hope seems to have fallen silent, even where silence screams. It is there, exactly there, where he speaks most. And maybe you're watching this video thinking, but it's different with me. My pain is greater, my case is deeper. I understand. Really, I understand. Each story has its particularities, each tear has its root, each pain has its time. But let me remind you of something that is bigger than any argument. God knows you. He knows your name, your heart, your thoughts, even the ones you never had the courage to say out loud. He knows the traumas that no one has seen. He knows your daily struggle to continue. And more than that, he loves you with a love that you still can't fully understand. It doesn't matter how dark the place you are is. It doesn't matter how silent the journey here was. It doesn't matter if you stopped praying, if you grew cold in faith, if you thought you were no longer worthy. God's actions do not depend on his perfection. He acts out of love. He acts because he is a father. He acts because he promised he would never leave you. And he doesn't lie. He doesn't fail. He doesn't forget. This story you just followed, from despair to a new beginning, from pain to purpose, is not just about one person. She is about many. Maybe it's even about you. And maybe God brought you to this video for exactly that reason, to say again, as I said to that man in the dark room, I'm here. You're not alone. Because that's exactly when everything seems lost. That's when the miracle begins. But understand, the miracle is not always an explosion of light. Sometimes it starts small, with a sincere tear, with a whispered prayer, with a step of courage. The miracle can start now. Yes, now. As you breathe, as you feel this heat in your chest, as this message enters your ears and touches your soul. This is already God moving. This is already the answer to something you couldn't even formulate in words. And I want to ask you something. I really want you to think about this in depth. Have you ever really given your problems to God? Have you surrendered completely, without reservations, without masks? Because sometimes we try to deliver, but we still hold back a part, still trying to resolve it alone. And God is saying, son, let me take care of this. Let me make your chaos a testimony. Can you trust? If this question moved you, comment below. Write what you feel. It can be a sentence, a prayer, a request. Write your way. Because this space here isn't just for watching, it's for connecting. It's to vent, to pray together, to remember that no one needs to walk alone. Every comment here could be the beginning of a new story, from a restoration, from a fresh start. And you can be sure, I will read each one. Let's pray together. Because this channel is not just about videos, it's about lives. And look, if you know someone who needs to hear this message, someone who is silent, someone you love, but feels like they are losing themselves, share this video. Sometimes we don't know what to say, but God uses a simple message like this to do what we can't do with words. Sometimes all a person needs is to know that there is still a way out, and you can be the instrument for this. And one more thing, and this is important, if this video spoke to you, if you felt something different, if any part of this story resonated with you, leave a like here. It's not just for numbers, no. It's because YouTube understands that this message is relevant and starts showing it to more people. It's a simple click, but it can change lives. It's an act of faith, a gesture that says, this message needs to go further. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now. Activate the bell, because here you will find more than videos. You will find messages that lift you up, stories that prove that God still speaks, that He still heals, that He still transforms. Every time you come back here, every time you comment, like, share, you are part of a mission. You are joining a greater purpose, bringing the word, bringing hope, bringing faith where there is no longer light. And that, my brother, my sister, is the work of God through ordinary people. People like me, like you. People who were once on the ground, but heard the voice that said, get up. I still have plans for you. So now, take a deep breath. Stay with that presence. Allow the Holy Spirit to continue touching you even after this video ends, because He is not limited to a screen. He is there where you are. And what He started, He will continue. What He whispered in your heart will grow. It will bloom, and it will become a powerful testimony, which one day you too will tell. And speaking of which, in the next moment of our story, you will see how God not only restores, but empowers. How He takes what was once a source of pain and turns it into a tool to heal others. What comes next is strong, it's deep, and it is further proof that God's grace is greater than any fall. So stay with me, because God's action is not over yet. If this story touched your heart, if at some point you felt the presence of God speaking to you, don't let it pass. Subscribe to the channel now. Here, you will find more than videos. You will find direction, comfort, renewed faith, and real stories that show how much God still works, even when everything seems lost. And if you made it this far, to the end of this video, that already says a lot. It says that you persevered, that something held you back, that this message found a home within you. Then do the following. Comment below, "God spoke to me." Write it in faith, declare it publicly, because this simple comment could be an answer for someone else who is reading and needs a signal. It could be the beginning of a miracle in someone's life, just like it was in yours. Let's take this message forward together, amen? And what you just heard is just the beginning, because in the next video, you will learn an even deeper story of someone who, despite being inside the church, felt empty inside until a spiritual twist changed everything. It is the type of testimony that confronts, awakens, and renews the faith of those who watch. Prepare your heart, because what God has done in this life will open your eyes to something you may have never noticed before. The transformation continues, and you are part of it.